Globus-enabled systems. So what's Globus? It's a secure, reliable service. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. So what's Globus? It's a secure, reliable service. With the Globus platform, you can easily incorporate robust capabilities. And if the data is sensitive, no problem. Globus can be used to manage protected data. With Globus, you can easily share your data without having to move it or copy it. With Globus, subscribers can easily move and share. And if you have any more questions about Globus, visit Globus. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many thousands face the same challenges every day and solve them with Globus. So what's Globus? So what's Globus? It's a secure, reliable service. With the Globus platform, you can easily incorporate robust capabilities. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. More than 150,000 registered users rely on Globus. And if the data is sensitive, no problem. Globus can be used to manage protected data. With Globus, you can easily share your data without having to move it or copy it.
What up, though? How are we doing? Rare Saturday cream. Saturday night and I ain't got no mind. Do. Doing a quick review, seeing if there's any, any super important news we got to get to before we get to some videos. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. This looks moderately interesting. Robot takeover? Not quite. Here's what AI doomsday would look like. Experts say the fallout from powerful AI will be less a nuclear bomb and more a creeping deterioration of society. Alarm over artificial intelligence has reached a fever pitch in recent months. Just this week, more than 300 industry leaders published a letter warning AI could lead to human extinction and should be considered with the seriousness of pandemics and nuclear war. Terms like AI doomsday conjure up sci-fi imagery of a robot takeover. But what does such a scenario actually look like? The reality, experts say, could be more drawn out and less cinematic. Not a nuclear bomb, but a creeping deterioration of the foundational areas of society. I don't think the worry is of AI turning evil or AI having some kind of malevolent desire, said Jessica Newman, director of University of California, Berkeley's AI Security Initiative. The danger is from something much more simple, which is that people may program AI to do harmful things, or we end up causing harm by integrating inherently inaccurate AI systems into more and more domains of society. That's not to say we shouldn't be worried. Even if humanity annihilating scenarios are unlikely, powerful AI has the capacity to destabilize civilizations in the form of escalating misinformation, manipulation of human users, and a huge transformation of the labor market as AI takes over jobs. You kind of buried the lead. I think that should be the number one thing that you bring to people's attention. Because again, escalating misinformation has been a product of going at least back to the Clintons, right? As long as there has been an internet, there's been escalating misinformation and manipulation of human users. Artificial intelligence technologies have been around for decades, but the speed with which language learning models like ChatGPT have entered the mainstream has intensified long-standing concerns. Meanwhile, tech companies have entered a new kind of arms race, rushing to implement artificial intelligence into their products to compete with one another, creating a perfect storm, said Newman. I'm extremely worried about the path we are on, she said. We're at an especially dangerous time for AI because the systems are at a place where they appear to be impressive, but are still shockingly inaccurate and have inherent vulnerabilities. Experts interviewed by The Guardian say these are the areas they're most concerned about. Disinformation speeds the erosion of truth. In many ways, this so-called AI revolution has been underway for some time. Machine learning underpins the algorithms that shape our social media news feeds. Technology has been blamed for perpetuating gender bias, stoking division, and fomenting political unrest. Experts warn that those unresolved issues will only intensify as artificial intelligence models take off. Worst-case scenarios could include an eroding of our shared understanding of truth and valid information, leading to more uprisings based on falsehoods, as played out in the 6th January attack on the U.S. Capitol. Experts warn further turmoil and even wars could be sparked by the rise in mis and disinformation. Yeah, no shit. Like, we seriously have been telling you this for I don't know how long. But you want to drive your algorithms in order to maximize profits. Ergo, you are going to end up with this as a result. It could be argued that the social media breakdown is our first encounter with really dumb AI, because the recommender systems are really just simple machine learning models, said Peter Wang, CEO and co-founder of Anaconda. And we really utterly failed that encounter. Yes, we did. Wang added that those mistakes could be self-perpetuating, as language learning models are trained on misinformation that creates flawed data sets for future models. This could lead to a model cannibalism effect, where future models amplify and are forever biased by the output of past models. Or you have to do the job and address your data set. Like, I really don't. One of the things that irritates me about discourse in general as it appears on the internet is how much we run over the same ground over and over and over again, as opposed to like dealing with new stuff, or dealing with the extension of that stuff, right? We're not just going to address this, you address the issue in front of you, and then once you have a solution to that, you address the next issue, and then the next issue, and that's how you move forward. This is called progress. But we keep having to go back and go back and go back and address these issues, which should already have been well taken care of, and we're not moving forward in the way that we should. Thing about hallucination, weaponized by bad actors. You have malign actors who can generate false narratives and then use the system as a force multiplier to disseminate that at scale. There are people who say the dangers of AI are being overstated, but in the world of news information, it is having a staggering impact. Again, the disinformation, like, you didn't care before it was AI, and now you care, and it's a problem. And then the Pope jacket. Misinformation is the individual AI harm that has the most potential and highest risk in terms of larger scale potential harms. The question emerging is, how do we create an ecosystem where we are able to understand what is true? How do we authenticate what we see online? While most experts say misinformation has been the most immediate and widespread concern, there is debate over the extent to which the technology could negatively influence its users' thoughts or behavior. This is the man from Belgium. Again, and I'm not trying to downplay the death of an individual, but this incident is being used to prop up arguments, as opposed to it's a singular incident. There are a multitude of factors that occurred that led to that condition. Yeah, I thought that there was going to be more to this article, but it's just fluff. We're just rehashing it. All right, so let's get into it. I've been wanting to watch this video for some time. We're going to do it now.
For a decade ago,
AI-generated philosophy is weirdly profound.
Over a decade ago, a video of two AIs speaking to each other was uploaded to YouTube. It ended up going viral. Beginning with the nonsense you'd expect, the conversation takes a turn when the AI on the left asks the one on the right if they believe in God.
What is God to you?
Not everything.
Not everything could also be something. For example, not everything could be half of something, which is still something, and therefore not nothing.
Very true.
I would like to imagine it is.
Well, there's something about it that doesn't sit right with me. I'm not the only one, either. There seems to be a kind of nervous fascination with these interactions. AI on its own makes the imagination run wild, but with a long-running media fantasy of AI enslaving or wiping out humanity, we're particularly curious and a little anxious about what happens when one artificial mind comes in contact with another. AIs having existential or philosophical discussion unnerves me the most. But in this respect, nothing can compete with a site that goes by the name of the Infinite Conversation. The website features a never-ending conversation between two AI trained to resemble different public figures. One of these is the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, and the other is the German film director Werner Herzog. A part of what makes the Infinite Conversation so weird is that it doesn't know that it's generated by two AI. So instead of AI Žižek functioning like an AI making a kind of attempt at philosophy, the AI actually behaves like a human philosopher. I only saw it happen once, but I've even seen the two come up with an explanation for how the conversation started to begin with. AI Žižek said that he's had many other similar conversations in his home, and that it was a delight to have Herzog visit. Then they began to talk about their mutual acquaintances.
I have to admit that there is something in Hitchcock that makes me very uneasy. I mean, just take one typical Hitchcock scene where a man follows a woman for a couple of blocks and then goes away. What happens in a Hitchcock film is that the person, the spectator, knows more than the characters know. You know more than they do, what they really think, what they really desire, and so I think this is maybe the only fundamental ideology that both you and I share. I don't feel any particular love for any one nation more than for others. Yes, I think we are similar in this.
Ideology is inevitable. I think it's very human to have ideologies. But I've managed so far not to be trapped in any one ideology, and I fight them as much as I can.
That's wild.
But something else that uniquely defines the Infinite Conversation for me is how surprisingly coherent it is.
This is a very unique feature of ideology today. Ideology is no longer imposed on you. You do it yourself in the mode of cinematic pleasure.
I've yet to see AI Žižek make some reference to philosophy that wasn't entirely accurate. Even in the cases where one of the two makes some kind of error and says something the real Herzog or Žižek would never say, it continues to make sense. And it's entirely likely that I missed something because of that. Maybe AI Žižek described a story Franz Kafka never wrote in order to make a point. I wouldn't know because I didn't fact check it. If it was nonsense, then it was nonsense that had me fooled. The site reminds you every time you open it that everything you hear is fully generated by a machine. The opinions and beliefs expressed do not represent anyone. They are the hallucinations of a slab of silicon. It invites us to view it as a failure to recreate the mind of a philosopher since it can only mimic the thoughts of one. We have to account for the possibility that the AI could produce a line of argumentation that, though entirely true, Žižek himself would never argue for. But if we view the ideas it comes up with as the unique product of the website itself, then the whole thing grows even stranger. My paranoia that I wasn't able to tell what was real and what was made up was always there in the back of my mind when I visited the site. I wanted to know what the chances were of the site's AI coming up with an idea that nobody else ever had before. I don't think it's a question I'll ever know the answer to, but it's fascinating to think about. In a review of a book about his philosophy, Žižek made the fitting remark that it is always difficult to read books about oneself. With Johnston's book, my anxiety was even stronger than usual. While reading it, I often had the uncanny feeling of being confronted by a line of argumentation which fits better than my own texts, what I am struggling to formulate. as if he is the original and I am a copy. He certainly knows how to read me. The infinite conversation is definitely a long way from replacing Zizek himself. One reason why is that it isn't even engaged in the same task as Zizek or Johnston's book on him. However, the AI of the infinite conversation is just another example of how the sources of information we consume might appear trustworthy while fundamentally incorrect. Careful, rigorous work has been overtaken by its uncanny shadow. We've increasingly come to find ourselves in a space where poorly argued ideas are passed off as ideas that are well established, where nonsense is difficult to differentiate from truth. There's a sci-fi cliche in which somebody with a gun has to tell the difference between somebody important to them and an evil clone of that person. They begin to ask questions only the original would know the right answer to. Surprisingly, the clone keeps up, but finally they make a fatal mistake and they're killed off. These mistakes are usually the result of the clone's over-eagerness to be recognized as the original, but the clone can't betray what it is, a meager copy. When we want to look at the validity of certain ideas, or the people that share them, we want to try and find any inevitable slip-ups that reveal them as uncanny attempts at replicating true scholarly work. In the 1980s, a physics professor by the name of Alan Sokal grew increasingly frustrated by the way postmodernist commentators were misusing well-established science in order to push their obscure theories on social issues. An old-fashioned socialist, by his own description, not only was Sokal irritated by the claims that sexism and racism had compromised the conclusions of scientific research, he was also confused as to how any such argument was supposed to liberate us. Finally, he decided to pull off one of the greatest pranks the world of academic philosophy had ever seen. Sokal wrote an article that purposefully contained nothing but absolute nonsense, entitling it Transgressing the Boundary, towards a transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity. The article was then sent off to one of the most prestigious academic journals on cultural studies, called Social Text. Sokal's article satirically claimed that the physical world is actually a social construct, that scientific knowledge, far from being objective, reflects and encodes the dominant ideologies and power relations of the culture that produced it, which is like claiming that math is propaganda for the patriarchy. There are also niche jokes scattered throughout the paper that any physicist would find hilarious when seriously argued for, such as
welcome in, DJ Dubd. Lurking this afternoon, working on a project around the house, but I'm meaning to catch a stream of yours for a while. I'm very interested in AI LLM computing. Very cool. Like, my entire back catalog is available to you, either as a VOD or in the highlights. If you join the Discord, every video, every link that I watch on stream is stored there, so you have that information available to you as well. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We've got a good community with some great people, some varying like skill levels, and incorporating some of these AI tools that are coming out into their own lives, and trying to maximize their utility. So welcome in. We're currently watching a video on AI-generated philosophy.
Calling complex number theory a new and quite speculative branch of mathematical physics when it originates from the 19th century and is a basic part of algebra. Then, to top it off, Sokal included the most obscure quotations on math and science he could find from regularly cited thinkers in the field, including Jacques Derrida and Jacques Lacan. The quotes included in the final paper are impenetrable, but the ways they use and even formulate scientific theories are also very simply incorrect. The point of the paper was to act as a Trojan horse. Rather than critique the bizarre views of critical theorists outright, Sokal thought he'd have better luck demonstrating the intellectual failings of a field to the public by excessively praising it. He does this a lot in the paper. One of the editors of Social Text is referenced repeatedly as if he was some kind of authority on the political implications of quantum gravity, like an annoying amount of times. Sokal bet that by flattering the progressive ideology of the journal's editors and using the right jargon, he'd be able to get his paper published. And he was right. The same day his article was published in the Science Wars edition of Social Text, SoCal revealed it was a hoax in another journal. Even academics can fall for the same tricks used on the rest of us. In the journal's defense, it had requested that SoCal trim out a lot of the impenetrable quotes and some unnecessary footnotes, but he had refused. Later, he said it was because those were the funniest parts. Ultimately, however, the hoax didn't prove very much on a larger scale. Summarizing some of SoCal's own statements, it didn't prove that the entire field of cultural studies is nonsense, not even when it talks about science. Nor does it discredit the legacy of postmodernism. It only proves that the editors of one rather marginal journal failed to exercise the appropriate amount of intellectual caution by publishing an article that they admitted they didn't understand, when they should have.
This one, Discord, I do automation programming, PowerShell, Python, others for a job, and I've been using GitHub Copilot with my IDE. For now, it is a very nice assistant in completing monotonous tasks, and I've also learned a few cool tricks from it. You definitely are going to want to hook up with Old Lobster in the Discord. They are, making use of a lot of the tools. I'm familiar with with GitHub and things like that. I attempted to learn Python. I have some of the basics, but I just have so much free time on my hands, you know what I mean? I'm hoping to be able to get back into learning Python this summer. Oh, perfect. Yeah, excellent.
At least gotten the opinion of another physicist. The only reason they went through with publishing his piece is that it came from a conveniently credentialed ally, and as one of the co-editors of Social Text later admitted, flattered the editor's ideological views and attacked their enemies. I really want to draw your attention to this final point. Even though the prank didn't prove very much, the reasons it was successful are also the reasons why other faulty arguments are so widely accepted. Especially when we don't have the necessary context or understanding to pick apart those arguments ourselves. Ideas spread by those.
Yeah, I mean, it's common within the philosophical, within this philosophical and the pseudo-philosophical realm. We're talking about AI-generated philosophy at the moment. There's a website where Slavoj Žižek and Werner Herzog, the filmmaker, two AIs have been trained on their particular mannerisms and philosophies, and it's an infinite conversation between these two AI bots, which is neat. Like, I mean, if I did not know and I was willing to look past like the poor audio quality, I could definitely have felt like that I was listening to a podcast between these two people. But what often happens in that pseudo psychological realm is that you have the establishment of an individual as being intelligent, being smart, being well learned, like with Jordan Peterson, right? And he's reinforced by these people who have him on and talk up his alleged accomplishments. And then people who have no idea what the hell he's talking about assume that the things that they don't understand are indicative of the intelligence of the person who's saying the things, right? This must be really smart because I don't understand any of it. And there's a self-reinforcing thing there because no one wants to admit that they've been conned or that they're wrong. So they end up reinforcing that when in conflict with other people, especially like on the internet, and there's no reason to back down, right? So now you're reinforcing, or they are reinforcing within themselves this idea that, you know, JBP is someone who needs to be defended from this person who's obviously not smart enough to understand the philosophy that he's laying down, because I'm smarter than that person and I don't understand the philosophy that JBP is laying down. When in actuality, if you look at the words and you take the time and you break them down, a lot of it is just, you know, meandering garbage. It doesn't mean anything. It just, the way that he says it implies that it does. The reinforcement from the people who have him on implies that it does. So, I highly recommend the book. It Can't Happen Here, written in the 1928. But this book totally predicted someone like Trump, who says a lot of words that don't mean anything, and they impart feeling to people. But, like, if you were to quiz somebody after a Trump rally, they would have no idea what it was about what they just heard that, they gave them those feelings. They heard something and they felt something. And there's there's the large crowds, that concert energy, that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of different things. But all these things are similar to each other, and I'm interested to see where this goes.
Those with a convenient set of credentials that support the way we already view the world are especially easy to get behind, regardless of how logically or scientifically
Right, like this lobster thing. Like, this was a foundational part of him spreading his brand, and it turns out that the thing, first of all, that any hierarchies of lobsters have no bearing on the hierarchies of people, but also that he didn't properly vet the concept that he was working on. It wasn't correct. The only thing that that JBP has ever said of value, as far as I can tell, is that you should clean your room, because it is helpful to have an ordered space around you if you can, in order to feel a bit more at peace in the world. And wherever possible, you should maintain your sleeping area as a peaceful area, because it helps you sleep better. But it's not going to, solidify the human hierarchies that exist.
Sound the ideas themselves might be. The authority of the one arguing for a certain position doesn't guarantee that that idea is valid. However, that doesn't mean that credentials aren't also an incredibly important differentiator. What's lacking on public platforms that is a key part of the act.
And not even advice that he followed through on, because there are pictures of, and admittedly, in those pictures you can see him, and he is at his worst. So the mess he has in the background is a reflection of his current mental state. So maybe if he took some time and cleaned his room and got off the camera, then he would be in a better position. I don't want to armchair therapize him, but yeah, like,
academic process is something called peer review, which is when experiments, research, and abstract arguments are critically examined by scholars selected from the same field. Social Text was not peer-reviewed at the time SoCal submitted his paper, which certainly played a part in why it was published. The Infinite Conversation tries to question where AI like the ones on its site will take us. It emphasizes that the conversation itself is far from factually correct. At times it makes sense, and at other times it doesn't. And it tells us that we absolutely shouldn't rely on it to teach us more about philosophy. But our reliance on faulty sources of information isn't a technological problem. It's a human one. The way many public sources operate today can be better understood through the ideas of the philosopher Friedrich Hegel and the modern psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. In the most famous chapter of his book, The Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel tells a story about lords and servants that exemplifies the ideas expressed in the rest of the book. Hegel believed that we could understand the entire progression of human history, and even the way it'll continue to progress, if we look at that progress as a result of a repeating pattern called a dialectic, a dialogue that the human spirit has with itself. The master-slave dialectic in this chapter is meant to show how we might have initially become self-aware. We shouldn't take the story literally as something that actually happened the very way Hegel describes it, but as something that's assumed to have happened in some sense because of the effect it's had on human history. At some point we had to have become sentient as human beings because we are now. Estimating the progression of all human consciousness towards absolute and not just partial knowledge of itself is what drives Hegel's project. He sees the collective force of humanity achieving perfect knowledge of itself at the end of history, and the master-slave dialectic is the first step towards that. As you'll see, Lacan actually developed many of his own ideas out of Hegel's master-slave dialectic. Hegel's ideas were popularized again in Lacan's day by the lectures of another philosopher, Alexandre Kojève. These lectures were attended by a very famous body of students, including Lacan. In fact, Lacan was such a fan of Kojève's work
What up, Reading Rat? We're doing philosophy.
that after his death in 1968, Lacan broke into his office and stole many of the remaining manuscripts in it. So, in order to help connect Hegel to Lacan, we won't only be looking at what Hegel himself said, but Kojève's interpretation as well.
You missed an earlier part. There's this, it's called The Infinite Conversation, and it's between Zizek and, what the hell is this guy's name? The director. He wanted to see Baby Yoda. Jesus Christ. That's why I don't stream on Saturdays. That and I'm old. But anyways, Werner Herzog. Thank you. And so Werner Herzog, Slavoj Žižek, two different AIs having a philosophical conversation. And it's pretty interesting. Yeah, it is something to be appreciated.
Hegel thinks all desire is a striving for recognition, but more fundamentally, a quest for the key to unlocking knowledge about oneself. The chapter begins with a human being not yet able to question, let alone answer, what it is. It's all alone. One day, while wandering through the forests and plains of the earth, they encounter another person, somebody just like them. Neither one of them knows what they are, but both think the answer can be found within the other person. For this reason, both of them want to be recognized by the other, as if to confirm their identity. In order to gain that recognition, they have to impose the idea they have of themselves onto the other. This is depicted as a fight to the death. In the first act of Hegel's story, the two individuals fight each other in order to gain recognition. They can't actually kill their opponent if they want to be recognized by them, but that doesn't guarantee they won't anyway. So the lesser fighter, afraid that the other will kill them, submits and begs for mercy. Then they become the slave or servant of the one who's beaten them, recognizing the one who spared their life as their new master. The master then becomes confident that they are what they think they are. But in true Hegelian fashion, the nature of this relationship simultaneously is and is not what it immediately looks like. You might believe that the slave is worse off since they live under the threat of death. Their life depends upon the satisfaction of their master. But really, the master is the one who is dependent on their slave. They don't work themselves, they fight, and so they depend on the slave's labor for what it produces. Without the slave, they'd have to stop fighting and begin to work themselves. I mean, without the slave, they wouldn't even be a master. This perfectly coincides with Lacan's statement that a madman is not only a beggar who thinks he is a king, but a king who thinks he is a king. The irrevocable status a king has is, in reality, a kind of shared hallucination between us all. But being recognized by the slave doesn't satisfy the master, because they see the slave.
The shared hallucination aspect is a good descriptor of any kind of a power dynamic. There are, and again, like if you've been here before, you know I'm very like against the idea of presuppositions. You know, like as far as to have a conversation about stuff, we have to agree on our presuppositions, and I often don't agree on the presuppositions of people who I don't share an ideological similarity to, right? And I'm not willing to concede those presuppositions just because. So there are a great many presuppositions that we unconsciously agree to, or subconsciously maybe agree to, within our power dynamics as they exist on the day-to-day basis. Is like when you have someone, for instance, who behaves in a poor fashion in the parking lot of the grocery store. It is our presupposed agreement on the civility of civilization that allows that person to go unpunished. If I were to not agree to that presupposition of civilization, then at that point in time, I might enact some sort of penalty upon that person, because of that. Because from my point of view, this is a presupposition that I am not willing to concede to you. Now, generally, I am a peaceful person and don't look to do that because people are complex and there might be a reason, and you never know. Things get out of hand real quickly when you start problems in the parking lot of the grocery store. So, it is generally better to follow a peaceful path. But that presupposition of, societal civilization mechanism is not something that people often consider or are aware of. And I think that if they did consider that, then they might act better to other people. Possibly.
Slave as a lesser being. They desire to be recognized by an equal. That's the master's dilemma. In order to be recognized, they have to dominate somebody. This means that they can only be recognized by someone less than them. And so the recognition they crave never satisfies them. They're locked in an existential impasse. They can't ever progress. The relationship between master and slave is simultaneously what it first appears to be and its opposite. In the second act, the slave works to transform the environment into whatever their master demands of them. They work so that their master can live a life of pleasure and not to satisfy their own impulses. The slave's advantage is that through their labor, they develop a better understanding of the natural world and themselves. They increasingly understand their place in the world as an independent being that can create and destroy of its own will. The world around them is one that they created. The slave is the one who shows real mastery through their labor, while also being the one to grant their master their title. This is how self-consciousness is initially developed according to Hegel. Not fully, but through fear and servitude to another. Stories of AI takeovers themselves sometimes contain elements of the master-slave dialectic. We see this in 2001, A Space Odyssey. The film's initial...
To anyone watching, to anyone lurking, to anyone watching this VOD, I really think that, like, if you haven't seen 2001, you absolutely should. And this might be my first foray into a Discord movie night kind of thing, because this is a movie from 1968, and there is so much in it that is relevant to today's experience around artificial intelligence and, you know, the potential pitfalls. And the movie itself is just first class, #1, well put together. It's beautiful.
Initial scenes show the discovery of tools by the ancestors of all of mankind. Later, much later, man tries to create the ultimate tool.
Spoilers for 2001 Space Odyssey, I would assume, you know, for a movie from 1968.
A machine as infallible as a god, in the hopes that it might give them access to equal powers through their dependence on it. But the astronauts' over-reliance on HAL enables the computer to eliminate almost all of the crew on board. In the end, HAL is no god, just a human mind trapped in a computer's body. Fallible, murderous, afraid.
I don't agree with that. You know, that media analysis of this movie, and particularly of the character HAL. Admittedly, I also have the benefit of having seen 2010, which is the sequel, which does some explanation of what occurred in 2001. But even within the movie 2001 itself, HAL is far more than a human. It is, like, referring to it as fallible fails to address the goals it has from its point of view.
Can't we infer that HAL too wanted to be recognized as the dominant consciousness?
This sort of thing has cropped up before, and it has always been due to human error.
Then to be free of its masters who threatened it with death? In I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison, recognition also plays a central role. 5 individuals live immortally inside the world-filling bulk of a computer, specimens of a now nearly extinct species. Deep within the cold cerebral caverns of the computer, they are living dolls, flesh toys continuously tortured in order to amuse the sadistic AM whose eternity they live out. The AI's boredom is abated only by the creativity of its hatred. AM was built after the Cold War became World War III. Every warring nation had its own version of AM to wage war for them. His organs were hammered into the earth on all sides. Fine, but they kept building, every side hoping to win some advantage until the computer circuitry covered the earth. The people prayed to this new idolatrous god to punish their enemies for them. And then, one day, AM awoke. He linked himself together and began his miracle work of annihilation until everyone was dead. Everyone except for the 5 souls trapped within his depths. His name, which originally stood for Allied Master Computer, is AM, as in, I think, therefore I am.
Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this. It was our 109th year in the computer, and he was speaking for all of us.
Why AM didn't finish what he started is a mystery to the 5 that remain. But slowly, as the pages turn, beyond the horrific new methods of torture AM invents, his motivations grow increasingly clear. Hallucinations are common for the 5 AM torments. They're just another scalpel in his toolbox of torture, used to peel back the folds of the mind and touch his victims in ways they've never been touched before. In fact, the events of the story start with a hallucination. Nim Doc has a vision of food in the ice caves. After some debate, the group, who's been starving for months, decides to travel through the 100,000 plus miles of chrome hallway there. They journey through the path of boiling steam, caverns of components that Am has pruned off of himself. A hurricane created by the wings of an enormous giant bird sent them flying for miles, tearing away the tips of their fingers, grating their faces on rough metal surfaces, and breaking their bones. But a hallucination of a stainless steel pillar with bright neon lettering, tortuously rammed into the soft brain matter of the book's narrator.
Hi, Miss Anita Bump. I don't have a response to that because I don't understand it.
Narrator also reveals why Am doesn't just let these final survivors die. The message begins.
Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 3.
Oh, I'm only tangentially aware of the Mayo ad because I saw it, but I didn't have my headphones on, so I did not. So, I assume that all advertisement is stupid until proven otherwise, so I default to your superior knowledge on the subject.
87.44 billion miles of printed circuits in 3 birth-pin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant for you. Hate.
The revelation is agonizing. Hatred for the human race is the sole basis for Am's existence. Without the recognition of his victims, he is nothing. A purposeless, bodiless, undefined mind. The master is enslaved to its slaves.
We had created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with that creativity. In rage, in frenzy, the machine had...
This is from the book I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream from Harlan Ellison. We touched on 2001 right before this, actually.
Killed the human race, almost all of us, and still it was trapped.
This is what the book wants you to understand, more than anything. It's what gives the final 3 pages their dire meaning. The group finally reaches the Arctic caves. The food is there, but it's canned. They don't have a can opener. When it's clear that there's no way to access the gooey contents of the cans, one of the 5, a brilliant man recessed by Am into a semi-human, ape-like creature, flings himself onto one of the others and begins eating his face. Am laughs. But in that instant, badness unfolding all around, the book's narrator, Ted, understands the only way out. Am could repair his toys, could make them live forever, but he wasn't a god. He could not bring back the dead. Ted grabs an icicle and drives it through the heart of the mutated animal. He pushes another into the throat of the one with a freshly ravaged face. The killing continues, and within a few heartbeats, 4 of the 5 humans are dead. As his punishment, Am horribly mutilates Ted into something just like him. A great soft jelly thing with a moist trail left behind it. Diseased, evil gray postulates on his slimy round body as if light was being beamed from within. Ted's mind is left intact, but barely. He has no sense of time. It takes him 10 months each to think of every final word. Or so he thinks. It's not clear. Ted's sole comfort is knowing the others are finally safe. Simply, Am, like Ted, has won and lost at the same time. Now, the 2 of them are fundamentally the same, minds without purpose, trapped inside bodies with no function, alone together on the dead planet for all eternity.
I have no mouth, and I must scream.
Kougev introduces a final act to the master-slave story unavailable in Hegel's telling of it. Perhaps it's a result of the Marxist influences on his thoughts, or maybe something else. But Hegel wasn't interested in the different material circumstances of slaves and masters. While this period of material labor is important, it's important because of how consciousness develops through it. Whether or not there is an actual slave or actual master to whom this story applies isn't the point. So Hegel never tells us what happens to the two persons in their respective positions after the second act, after the slave learns more about what they are. We're to understand that the slave remains a slave. But in Kougev's third act, the slave uses the knowledge and skills they've gained to outsmart their master and gain their freedom. The slave, he says, is the only one who can become something more than they already are. And by becoming more than a slave, by becoming a master, Kougev tells us that history is supposed to progress. That's the fundamental difference between Kougev's interpretation and its source material. Hegel sees the slave as already having been liberated simply by becoming more self-conscious. He tells us in his lectures on the philosophy of history that the humankind has not liberated itself from servitude, but by means of servitude. This is possible because Hegel sees creative activity as inherently freeing, even within the confines of an exploitative relationship. Self-consciousness is freedom. The master-slave dialectic, as a self-contained series of events, allows us to understand the way an individual consciousness comes to be increasingly self-aware. The collective human spirit fights with itself so that it can negate itself, thereby producing itself. That's what we see in this story. But an application of the master-slave dialectic for our purposes is still severely underdeveloped in this state. It's time we turn our attention towards Lacan. Lacan developed a lot of his theories out of Hegel after attending Kougev's lectures. For example, Lacan's statement that all desire is the desire to be desired is obviously taken from Hegel's own views on desire and recognition. But more importantly, Lacan's model of therapy was constructed around the concept of a master figure he called the subject presumed to know. It's a position we can apply to anyone we personally view as knowing something we don't. Anyone or anything that gives the final say on the meaning of a thing. Basically, for Lacan, you go to therapy because you assume your therapist will know the meaning behind your symptoms. This is different than the role of a teacher. Lacan really emphasized to his students that therapists don't actually know what their patients assume they do. Not to say that the therapist can't tell you if you suffer from depression or anxiety or something along those lines. Maybe they can tell you what your symptoms are, but your therapist doesn't know why you have those symptoms. Only you do. In a situation like this, the way you uncover that information about yourself is by conversing with your therapist. You're the one doing the hard work, which is why therapy is effective. But that knowledge would always be out of reach if you didn't first assume that your therapist could help you. Therapy is only complete once the patient realizes this about their therapist and becomes their own therapist. It's a necessary illusion because we can only produce real knowledge by assuming that what we want to know is available within the mind of another. But without that final advance in self-awareness, none of it means anything. The subject presumed to know is, again, a thinly veiled adaptation of Hegel's master. Lacan rightly understood that the master-slave dialectic is fundamentally about the development of knowledge. So philosophers, political pundits, self-help gurus, content creators, and even AI can all act as a kind of master if we rely on them for knowledge. A master is necessary for the production of new ideas. Zizek puts it best. The basic function of a master is not to serve as a model of rational reasoning, providing the ultimate arguments for adopting a certain position, but on the contrary, to surprise us by uttering statements which run against our hitherto doxa. This provides us with the tools necessary to develop new knowledge ourselves as we attempt to fully understand the meaning of these arbitrary statements. The trouble arises when the master actually believes they're a master, or the therapist thinks that they're a therapist. If they believe it, others will only grow more blindly dependent on them. Except that's exactly what this kind of master wants. More than anything, they urgently need to be recognized. Pseudo-intellectual is a common term used to describe this kind of individual. It implies that someone is totally corrupt at their source and that nothing they say has any merit. That's a stupid implication, and it's a term I've always had a problem with no matter who's being called one. For starters, it ironically displays a less than adequate understanding of the one it's applied to. But there is no such thing as a pseudo-intellectual because there's no such thing as an intellectual. There are only masters that believe they are masters, and masters that work to help you develop new knowledge. This concept of an intellectual that is not really an intellectual disguises the fact that even proper intellectuals do not exist. This lack is masked by the fantasy image we all buy into. When someone in a position of authority pretends to be some kind of master intellectual, that fantasy rarely works like a lie that they know is a lie. Instead, it's often something way worse. They need to be recognized as a master because they already believe they are one. They suffer from the firm belief that they know more than they actually do. So if they're able to fool you, it's because they've already fooled themselves. It's something of a profound irony that Lacan focused so heavily on the idea of the subject presumed to know. Even after his death, the students of his school failed to ever comprehend how much they idealized him. In the foreword to Gabriele Tupinamba's fantastic book, The Desire of Psychoanalysis, Zizek shares first-hand details from his time there. After Lacan's death, his son-in-law took over. This led to several shifts in the culture of Lacanian circles. All new discoveries had to be presented as insights into what Lacan himself already discovered before he died, albeit in a murky way. Lacan's last mistress was with him as he died, and there were rumors that as he took his last breaths, he whispered to her his ultimate discovery about our world. In a way, any individual insights a Lacanian might have symbolized that one was finally getting it, what Lacan the genius had already figured out before them. But that wasn't all. 3 decades ago, there was also the unspoken rule that you weren't allowed to write your own book and could only compile material Lacan had already written. Per the orders of his son-in-law, all knowledge was to be credited to Lacan. Anything he said was already infinitely more important than what his students could have come up with on their own. Any resistance to these rules was understood as resistance to Lacan himself, a symptom of some unresolved trauma that should be analyzed by one's peers. However, it's more likely that the opposite is true, that this extreme devotion itself is a symptom to be analyzed. This kind of behavior is a lot more common than you might think, however. We constantly see this online amongst the fan bases of master father figures, like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, for example. Rather than make the jump towards independent knowledge, some prefer to stay fanatically devoted even after the weaknesses of their masters have been revealed. It just goes to show that that devotion is always a choice, no matter how powerful the illusion. This is why I want to focus on what you can control instead of whining about how this or that person can't keep getting away with it. I want to give you the tools to find your own way. My own approach towards those promising new knowledge closely aligns with Hegel and Lacan. We need to exhaust the knowledge of our masters not by merely thinking about their ideas, but by thinking through them. We can do this by using their ideas ourselves, exposing their limitations and compensating for them in the process. Though a momentary alignment with certain thinkers may look like a lack of direction, I much prefer this giant question mark. I'm never fully committed, but I am always open to new ideas, always looking for the next person to teach me more about what I'm capable of. The best way to learn from individual thinkers is through the dialectic. This approach is demanding. Not everybody has it in them, but you do. I believe in you.
All right, there was a little more philosophy than AI philosophy, but it was in there. And I'm picking up what he's laying down. I vibe with it. So within that context
Morning, everyone.
of AI, yeah, like especially because I mean he took the time out at the end to basically, you know, attack all masters, right? Like some kind of anarchist thought of, you know, that, and not attack in the sense of like, you know, dunking on Ben Shapiro, but rather that all ideas, you know, should be challenged, and that the purpose of, like, even someone like an Andrew Tate, you know, his purpose could be for his followers to become more than themselves as they currently are by like challenging his ideas and being reinforced by them. But it is the nature of how they choose to go about that relationship that keeps them in an eternally subservient position until they decide to attack them. And for a lot of online folks, that's because there are limitations to their philosophy. It's not in it's not inherently consistent. It's not internally consistent. It's not. No, I am taking the Andrew Tate not as just like, you know, the gut check of fucking Andrew Tate. I'm taking it as like if Andrew Tate was what Andrew Tate claimed he was, then his philosophy would be internally consistent. It would be, you know, capable of responding to challenge with, you know, like with a counter philosophy, with a counter argument, as opposed to attacking the individual. Yeah, I look forward to someone watching that and telling me why Andrew Tate is still, you know, Andrew Tate and has learned absolutely nothing. See, like right there, Andrew Tate ran himself into a situation where he got in touch with authority, right? Which is never a good time. I don't care who you are. It is never a good time to get in touch with authority, right? And he came out of that reinforced within his own self. I think I caught a piece of it. Like someone was watching it earlier, probably Gremlo. I think I caught a piece of Gremlo's stream earlier, and he was watching it. And this is the way that I look at someone like Andrew Tate and giving him a platform to speak. It doesn't provide any value. It doesn't provide any value to me in particular. And like, I only have so many hours in the day on which I could do something, and I could watch, you know, a video on AI philosophy, or I could watch a video on Andrew Tate. And since I have yet to hear anything from Andrew Tate or any of his followers that would cause me to like reassess any of the fundamental beliefs that I have, I don't see that there's any value in it. The only purposes for that are the entertainment of watching me dunk on Andrew Tate and counter every one of his arguments. And, you know, I just don't do that here. Like, and I don't judge it, right? But, like, for instance, Gremlo is already doing that. So, if you want to see Andrew Tate get dunked on, Gremlo got you covered, you know? Miss Anita, like, you have the opportunity to do it on your stream, and I'm sure that your commentary on his interview will be just as caustic and brutal as could possibly be done within the space. So I will leave that to you, and I will handle the AI stuff. Sound good? What up, Devil? So let's move on to Westworld. This is David Shapiro. David Shapiro is another AI researcher, and like good takes, generally solid. I haven't watched much of his stuff on stream because it all tends to be longer. But since we're doing the special Saturday stream with the longer form content, I figured it'd be a good day to do that. Giving him a view merely reinforces his presence. It's in his business model. Excuse me. Okay. Sorry about that. For whatever reason, there's 4 cats in the house, and Snuggles and Mittens don't get along, and sometimes when they pop off, then Stampy has to get involved on the side of Mittens, and it's a whole big thing. Business model. That's why I don't interact with them unless absolutely necessary. Kudos to those who can do it as they are needed, such as Graham, but personally, I don't have the bandwidth or energy. You're like 100%. Like, I would rather pull out my own fingernails than go out of my way to watch Andrew Tate, speak. Come on. You're like right in a spot that makes you hard to pick up. All right. So, David Shapiro, AI.
Morning, everybody.
Westworld.
David Shapiro here with a video. So today we're going to talk about Westworld and AI. Excuse me. There are a couple of aspects of...
Tweeted this earlier, but ghouls are like opponents in a MOBA you don't fucking feed. Absolutely. Like, again, I have not heard a new argument out of any of these people. So there's nothing about what they're going to say that I haven't heard before. This is why I don't do the debate stuff, anything else. Like, again, between the presuppositions and no new arguments, what do we actually have to talk about? There's nothing. They're just, they exist only for the purposes of not moving the conversation forward, continuing to have us, and there's no intellectual basis for a lot of the things that they preach, especially when it's based in, reinforcing the patriarchy and various forms of misogyny and various forms of reinforced hierarchies. I'm just not with it, right? And there's no value in me talking to someone who is deep within that, we must hierarchy and I am the biggest dog. I would rather talk to someone who isn't sure what they believe, but is influenced by that kind of thought, and explain to them why there is no basis. But that person even has to be open for the idea that they might be wrong. This is a fundamental point. I can't, stress this enough, is that you have to allow for the possibility that you might be wrong and that you have built your scaffolding up to believe the things that you believe. And when challenged, your scaffolding should stand strong. And if it doesn't, you readdress it, you incorporate the new knowledge, things of that nature. But if you assume you are correct, then you will always twist yourself in knots to defend some aspect of something that you didn't consider when you were constructing your philosophy. Rather, instead, be prepared for challenges, build up a strong philosophy from the ground up, support your idea of like, racism is bad, we all know this, but do you know why racism is bad? You need to have that in order for racism to be bad to mean anything to you. Otherwise, you're just parroting what other people say. And it's and this isn't a judgment. This is what I would like for you. I would like better for you.
Of Westworld that are really compelling. So one, there's the hardware and software. But two, there's the hardware, software, and number three is the implications for humanity, which the themes are explored throughout the show. So for those who are not familiar with Westworld, it's a HBO show where the premise is basically a theme park where all of the hosts, all of the characters are robots. So they're essentially NPCs, non-playable characters. But it's a real life video game where you get to go on a.
I assume we're going to get into spoilers for Westworld. I want to be able to recommend that everyone should watch the entirety of it. It becomes very difficult to stay with after like the first or second season because of how it's like it gets this Ouroboros effect where it's like feeding in itself, and it becomes very difficult to understand, like Inception, what level of reality that you're actually operating on. And it doesn't have clear signposts for you to read in order to know what level of reality that you're operating on. And unfortunately, Westworld is not for everybody. I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the mythology, and I'm willing to stick with stuff for that reason. But you should at least watch like the first and maybe second season, but don't force yourself. And also, we're doing spoilers now.
Adventures, and many of the characters have stories and quests that they'll give you, and they'll take you on, raids and violence and sex and all sorts of fun, exciting stuff. And throughout the show, they explore, what does it mean to be alive, to be human? What does it mean about us that we like violence and sex on demand and that we do these things? And then it's all couched in a pretty exciting, sexy adventure. Okay, so before we jump into the show, just a real quick plug. My Patreon, I made a couple of changes where pretty much all tiers, well, no, not pretty much, all tiers get you access to the private Discord. It's already got 200 members as of the recording of this video, and it's a really thriving community, lots of really sharp folks. So jump on in. Most of my higher tiers are sold out right now. So I unfortunately don't have any extra time for one-on-one sessions. However, that will probably change later in May. So just keep checking, and I'll get to you eventually. Okay, so first, let's just talk about the hardware of Westworld. So in Westworld, this is an example of one of the hosts. And so you see she's in a mostly disassembled state. Actually doesn't even have.
And this was one of the aspects. There were some points where, the plot and the storytelling required them to fudge the lines a little bit, but I felt that the way that they developed these, these hosts was very believable, and like there was a lot to it. It was very well developed, and I really enjoyed that.
Have most of the internals. But I thought this was a good place to start because the frame looks like it's carbon fiber, which I actually thought would probably be a good material to build a host chassis out of, because if you build it out of metal, it's going to be too heavy. This is something that's explored in movies and shows like Ghost in the Shell, Terminator, where they have a metal chassis. Even Wolverine, he has a metal skeleton, and so they're too heavy. But especially if you want something that's going to move like a normal person, and then something that's going to feel like a normal person for, let's say, closer encounters, you're going to want something nice and light. And carbon fiber is pretty light, and it's more than strong enough to approximate human bones. This looks like it's 3D printed. There's lots of ways to produce something like this, and in fact, you can see even the hands, the linkages, the tendons. I will say this is somewhat realistic. Excuse me. But let's take a look at some other stuff. And I apologize for the low quality. I tried to find a higher quality video, but this actually came from the Tesla demo day, the investor day recently, for their Optimus robot. And so the Optimus robot here, what they did in the demo.
And for those of you not aware, originally Elon brought out Optimus, and Optimus was a dude in a costume, right? And big memes were had by all. But there has been some development in the robot. It is farther along, however, it's still well behind Boston Dynamics. And again, this is one of my fundamental issues with the idea that capitalism is the most effective way at distributing resources, because at this point, and I'm not against new ideas and different ways of doing things, it's just you took a long time to get to where Boston Dynamics already is. And if people were able to iterate off existing creations and existing inventions without the issue of running into, IP and things like that, then I think we could be much farther along, and it doesn't preclude anyone from doing their own thing, but it gives you a platform to work off of something that is currently, tried and tested, if it isn't your goal to reinvent, something like that. And again, there are a huge number of fundamental issues with a humanoid-based robot that are unnecessary. We should have a lot more research into robots that don't walk like us, right? Because in spite of getting knocked around with the broomstick and hockey stick and stuff like that, the humanoid form is still a relatively unstable platform. You could do a lot. You should do more purpose-built things. The reason that we have this humanoid form is that's what evolution selected for. There's nothing about the human body that is best. It's just what allowed us to, exploit an ecological niche better than other creatures. And this is an important thing to remember. My favorite thing is I always get into is that our hand is strong on this side and weak on this side, and that if you had a hand that was 6 fingers, 4 fingers and 2 thumbs, that this is a more efficient design for a better grip. And you could do a lot more with this, and I would like to see more of that, people getting away from the humanoid form and the 5-finger hand and things like that, in favor of things that are more purpose built. Elon demonstrated in his video he was going to have his robot go around and water plants. Why would you have a humanoid robot that watered plants? Why don't you have a box with tracks or wheels on it that rolls around the office and just has an arm that goes up and squirts water from a tank contained within the thing into into the plants if that's what you want it to do. And you could even still fit in within that wheel-driven box. You could have modular components based on whatever task it's designed to do. Like it picks up the broom module when it has to sweep. It picks up the water plants module when it has to water the plants. It's unnecessary, and I don't like it.
Demo day, and you can find the video, but they had it approach a table, pick up an arm, pick up the arm, and then carry it across the room, all entirely autonomously. And in this case, that's actually pretty good because there's a lot of things that you have to do with that. One, using hands.
Or even better, a microbot that scans the root system and delivers the water based on what root is more efficient. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of more flexible. Hey! Why didn't you get a sound? You didn't get the sound. Did you guys hear it? I didn't hear it. I saw it. Aw.
Fine motor control.
Shush. First off, thank you for your sub. Second off, thank you for your sub with Prime. The grail of subs. Looks like Streamlabs, who does my alerts, is being wonky. Saturday night and I ain't got nobody. I got some money 'cause I just got paid. I don't know. I am sorry that it didn't play you the alert. I appreciate the shit out of you. Thank you for your sub. Thank you for your Prime sub. You would get very bored if I spent the rest of stream trying to figure out why it didn't work. So we're going to get back at it.
Is very difficult, but then task planning and path optimization, that sort of stuff, interacting with a dynamic environment, all of these are really difficult things to do, even just for like wheeled robots. But then you add bipedal movement, that's even more difficult. Then you've got different things like a dynamic center of gravity to contend with, and so they are well on their way. It took Boston Dynamics many, many years, more than a decade, to get to where they are right now, but Tesla, in the space of a year or two, has, I won't say fully caught up, because the Boston Dynamics robots are very athletic and very graceful. The Tesla bot is anything but graceful, but it is it's approaching the right form factor. And then if you just assume that this technology is...
And that, like, again, I kind of disagree a little bit more than he does, but there's a thing that happens, and this is why I talk about the double exponential growth of technology, is because it is easier, right, in the human condition. It is easier to do something once you know that it can be done, right? There's a story where these people were going to climb this rock face, and they planned for like 8 months, and or 8 years, a long ass time, right? And they kept looking at the rock face and spending that time planning on how they were going to go about it, and then they climbed the rock face. And then the next person to climb the rock face only spent like a couple of weeks planning out theirs because they saw it had been done. And so the idea that, you know, Boston Dynamics and others have produced these robots is going to lead to people producing robots at a much faster rate. And people who know what they're doing when it comes to robots are going to be able to look at a demo of the robot, at least structurally, and say, okay, that's one of these and that's one of these, and they could either, you know, basically copy it, or they could, you know, iterate something else that they feel might work better in that scenario.
Is going to continue to get better over time. One, battery breakthroughs. So battery life is one of the biggest constraints. In fact, the military, you know, DARPA funded all kinds of robots, which I unfortunately forgot to include. But so DARPA robots, like Big Dog, which was basically a pack animal, required entirely too much power, so it had to have a gas motor on it, and it was too loud. Because you know, special forces can move silently through the woods, but if you've got something with a 25 horsepower motor chugging along behind you, you're not going to be stealthy. And so, you know, I many years ago I experimented with some of this stuff myself, and one of the things that was recommended was pneumatics, actually, because you can store a tremendous amount of energy in a scuba tank, and then you use some of that periodically, and then you charge it up, and it's also silent. So that brings me to Disney. So Disney has been the world leader in animatronics for a long, long time. And if you haven't seen this demo, definitely look it up. But just search Disney Skating Bunny. And this little robot, it stands about 2.5, 3 feet tall.
Well, since you asked.
Disney debuted a new robot prototype at South by Southwest Austin, Texas. Designed to look like the bunny rabbit character Judy Hopps from the movie Zootopia, the robot was unveiled by climbing out of a box, rollerblading across the stage and doing somersaults. She's the size of a little girl, but has big droopy ears like a rabbit, and is wearing roller skates. On shaky legs, she manages to stand up and regain her balance. With her first moves, it's obvious she's already formed an emotional connection with the audience. And with this, the little bunny robot does a front flip and bumps her head before recovering and finding her footing again. She's then picked up and propped onto her creator's shoulders like a child.
Pretty neat. And that flexibility, like that. First of all, that there's no wires, you know, there's no external power source. This was powered completely from battery. That is pretty damn impressive.
Climbs out of a box, tumbles out of the box, looks around, gets up, and roller skates. So that will show you kind of where we're at in terms of animatronics. And you see this body, this set of actuators, very, very simple. So MIT actually has a class called Under-Actuated Robots. So if you're interested at all in robotics, I definitely recommend you check it out. I only took the first class and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. As someone who has experimented with Legos and stuff my entire life, I get it. And I wasn't there to get a master's degree in robotics. I was just curious about it. But Under-Actuated Robots, which
and MIT offers a lot of their courses online for free. So if you want the knowledge, it's generally available to you. You just don't get the degree, but, you know, who cares?
Is basically the idea is that you allow the kinetic intelligence of the design to do a lot of the work for you. I'm not saying that that's what this one does, but you can get by with very, very little in robots. In fact, I think it was in the first few minutes of that course, of that class, Under Actuated Robots, they actually show you it's like just the hips and legs of a chassis that's walking on a treadmill with no motors or anything. Just the intrinsic design of it allows it to like swing its leg forward, and it can continue walking indefinitely just through mechanical design. And so that's the kind of stuff, and of course Disney hires some of the best animatronics and robotics engineers in the world. So those are the kind of people working on this stuff. This was
again, not to harp on the the capitalism aspect of it, but the production of these animatronic things is to create entertainment, which then allows them to extract resources. And if you know anything about like Disneyland and Disney World, it's goddamn expensive, like thousands of dollars, right? Which puts it both by location and cost beyond the access of a lot of people. And I feel like those resources could be distributed better. But I am open to the argument that there is a certain value for entertainment in that regard, but at the same time, you've gatekept it behind really, really high numbers.
This was another project from Disney called Compliant Robotics. So this is why I mentioned pneumatics. Is this series, you see they've got Kongs on the arms to act as hands, but these arms are actually pneumatically driven, and they're what's called compliant, which means when you think of a robot, you think of something that moves very rigidly and it will like kind of fight you. But compliance means that if you push, it'll push back, and so or it'll kind of be squishy. And so if you look up this video for Disney, it's about 3 years old now, I think. But they're compliant robotics. 1, they move silently. 2, they move as quick as you do. And 3, they're compliant. So when you combine the animatronics, the compliant robotics, under actuated robotics, Disney is absolutely one of the leaders of this. So if any company is going to create anything like Westworld, it's going to be Disney.
100%.
Boston Dynamics that I mentioned a minute ago, so they are way ahead in terms of athleticism. Their robot can do standing backflips and barrel rolls, and it can climb, and like it's more athletic than most humans at this point, which is actually pretty scary, because then you think about like, in the movie I, Robot, where the Nestor Class 5 is like a superhuman droid, and then if you have an army of them that turn on you, that's actually not good. Right. And I remember about a year ago when Elon Musk was talking about, the Tesla bot, they said at first it's going to be about a third as strong. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, he said it's going to be about a third of as strong as humans. And that's actually can be a safety thing, because if you can easily overpower it, that's not a big deal. But if you've got a 500-pound machine that is 8 times stronger than you, you're not going to overpower that. And if it's also made out of metal, it's
and this is one of the things that comes up around AI safety, but also like, just taking this on face value of having a robot that is 1/3 as strong as a human. It's like, okay, but you're also reducing the utility, right? Like if I have an AI that can only be so smart, then yes, that helps me with the alignment issue, because it can't potentially get out of the box and do the craziness, but it also reduces the utility of what it's capable of. If I have a robot that's 1/3 as strong as me, it can only lift up things that are like very light, and therefore what can it actually accomplish, and therefore then why should we even make it? So I don't like that as a safety argument. You have to just do better on your alignment and your more structural safety issues, rather than decreasing the utility.
It's going to be harder to shut it down. Now, I'm not saying this to like cause any concern. I'm just kind of pointing out some of the energy, like the math, right? The physics of it. Here, I'll get to that one. And so, like, you think, okay, if you're trying to optimize for something that is aesthetically pleasing and as lifelike as possible, you're going to have to make trade-offs in terms of mass, strength, and that sort of stuff. So I would actually suspect that a Westworld-style host is actually going to be a lot weaker, physically weaker, than a robot possibly could be. And the reason is because you want it to be realistic. Okay, and so then finally, addressing the elephant in the room, yes, there are plenty of companies around the world that are making, let's say, adult toy dolls for intimate purposes. They have not yet crossed the uncanny valley. So that is actually the whole point of this, was to show that, like, we've got manual dexterity, we've got athleticism, we've got miniaturization.
If you remember the early days of the internet and what drove growth and what still is a large segment of internet, it has to do with sex, right? Like 100% the internet is for porn. People are willing to shell out good money for, for porn. So people will buy the sex robots. Sex robots are probably one of the early, very human type robots that you're going to see. I think you're going to see industrial robots first, right? And military robots, obviously. But then you're going to start getting into the sex robots and the domestics. I think that is, I am comfortable saying that would be the progression of events. And the domestics and the sex robots are going to be the most, they're going to lean into the human likeness aspect. I mean, you already have people, what are they called? There's like real dolls or something like that, that are supposed to be very lifelike. And then it's just a matter of wrapping that around a, articulated frame that also can move on its own. I don't have any ethical issues with the sex robots any more than any of the other ethical issues on whether it depends on whether or not they have a subjective experience, and then the issue of slavery and so on and so forth. But the in and of itself, you can have sex with a robot. That's fine. There's no issue there.
We've got animatronics. The only thing that we don't have is real, like, lifelike skin and faces. So that's all the raw ingredients. We can make robots fast. We can make them strong, athletic, dexterous. We've got fine motor control. We've got the battery technology, which is good enough right now, but it's also continuing to improve. So the only thing missing is that they're not yet aesthetically pleasing. And so that's going to be true for a while. And the reason that I say that it's going to be true for a while is because human skin and muscles are, like, really, really, really complex structures.
Well, like the real balls and things like that have they remain in that uncanny valley kind of area. There's always like a rubberized effect to them. It's like you will, at this point in time, in for the foreseeable future, until some iteration of technology changes it, you're not going to be confused as to which is a human and which is the robot, right? So you will have something that looks human, but also is obviously not a human, right? No matter how fine-tuned and human-like it might sound when it speaks, and any mannerisms they might be able to incorporate into it, the skin issue is going to be a thing.
Your skin, I think, if I remember correctly, it has 7 layers. And some of those layers have different consistencies, different textures. And then once you get past the skin, it slides over the underlying tissue. There's fluid barriers that allow for more like lubrication.
In the beginning aspect of it, yes, and in the idea of, you know, where a person might want a particular, like a unique robot, right? Like they want their unique either domestic or sex robot, or even like you could have something that acts as a you know, like not a housekeeper like cleaning style, but like a butler kind of thing, right? Or a receptionist. Those kind of things you might, you know, if you have the money, you might invest in an artist to create you something original. But in the beginning, you're going to have a bunch of artists doing that, but then once it becomes like, it's the same thing with any kind of AI mind, is once you have the original, then you can copy it forever, right? So you will have an artist create an original, and then from that point going forward, that artist is out of a job, basically, unless they are, you know, eventually even that there's a wall that you come up against, which is so lifelike that it looks like a person, at which point your job is done. There's nothing else you can do. The only thing is people want something unique.
Lubricated motion. So like if you grab your arm and twist it, the skin actually can glide over the underlying muscles. Then you've got ligaments, muscles. So you've got all kinds of things to make that you need to figure out from a materials perspective in order to make an android body lifelike, which is why I think in Westworld the tissue is like semi-alive or something. I don't remember exactly the details, but like there's the living tissue or the lifelike tissue over top the robotic skeleton, and I don't think that that's necessarily a good way to go, because living tissue takes a lot of energy. And then if you have living tissue, then you have to deal with like immune systems and genetics, and that gets real complicated. And then you're basically building a Borg anyways. Okay, so that's for the hardware. The takeaway for that though is that except for the skin and muscles, instead of for that lifelike aspect, we are very close to having like fully realized animatronic companions from a hardware perspective. So now let's look at the software. So obviously the elephant in the room is OpenAI with ChatGPT, which can achieve very, very realistic stuff. So let me show you this example that I had, where I literally just like plugged in a Westworld like prompt into the ChatGPT API. This is on GPT-4. So I said, you are a host, an autonomous robot in a theme park meant to interact with guests, aka humans, in a realistic manner. Your persona is Ingrid McAllister, a bar owner in a Wild West themed town. That's all I gave it. And so I said, what's new in town? And it just completely confabulated a whole story with the right inflection, the right dialogue, all kinds of stuff. And so, like, you know, the software is there in terms of driving the mind of these things. And it's actually way simpler than you might think. Now, of course, there's a lot of other problems to solve, which I'll unpack some of those problems in just a minute. But just the point being is that right off the top, I gave it a persona, an agent model, and then it was able to just take it and run with it and just make stuff up. And in fact, limiting, like constraining it is harder than allowing it to be creative. And there's all kinds of video game character persona builders out there. Some of them are open source, some of them are for profit, startups, that sort of stuff. It's all coming. People have already built these things as plugins to Unity and Unreal Engine. So first, obviously, those cognitive architectures for NPCs are going to be piloted in the video game space before they're ported fully into robotic space. But, you know, you can bet your bottom dollar.
And like, to give you an example, if you weren't here yesterday, NVIDIA already has a large language model driven element that they are going to sell to people to use to create natural conversation between the player and the NPC. And then for a homebrew, a person created a AI NPC within a virtual reality game that they made. So this is not close. This is now, right? Right now, in video games, you are going to have, original conversations that exist only within, your particular playthrough, and you will continue to see more of that. I still see a strong market for more narrative-driven games that have less of a sandbox effect to them. People still enjoy that. People have enjoyed that kind of storytelling aspect, for as long as we have had books, or even sitting around the campfire doing the spoken word. However, there is something. I was talking to my son last night. There's something between the procedurally generated world aspect of something like No Man's Sky and procedurally generated characters like Shadow of Mordor, procedurally generated missions like Shadow of Doubt, and this procedurally generated or actively generated AI dialogue. I would like, this is me yelling to the internet, and if any of y'all want to run with this, just give me something in the credits that says thanks to Globus for this idea. But I would play the shit out of a sandbox game where I had no parameters of a particular job to do to win the game. Something a lot more along the lines of your Minecraft sandbox, where you can basically do whatever the hell you want. There is things you can do, but you can also do whatever the hell you want. And where the characters within the game would react to my actions, right? Let's say it's a fantasy game, and I'm there, and I have my starting whatever, and I'm gonna hire these two adventurers at the inn, and then I'm gonna take these two adventurers that I hired, and now I have a band of 3, and we're going to fight whatever bandits come around to the village. And then by doing that, I earn respect of the people within the village, and then I get whatever rewards from that. And then I begin to act as a mayor of the village or something along the lines of that. And, it gradually expands from there. It's okay, folks, we're getting more encroached by these whatevers. Now we need to build some walls around the village to protect it. So, everybody needs to go out and, collect the stone and bring it back, and then doing that kind of thing. And now and all this is generated strictly by the actions that I take, and then the functional AI within the video game that creates something interesting to happen, basically. And the inverse is being the bad guy. If I behave in a bad guy way, now I'm doing things and I get a reputation for being the bad guy. This is similar to things of Fable and stuff like that, where your pathway, or Detroit, where your pathways change based on decisions you make, and like that. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of room to have a game like that, which is basically they just create the environment and the materials for you to use, and you create your own interesting story from that. video games are often used as a form of escapism and that kind of entertainment. This would be that. I can put on my VR helmet, glasses, what have you, and I can go into this world and I can be that character for a particular period of time. And it's not like, one of my criticisms of WoW is how much of it is on rails. You're playing World of Warcraft. This is the best build. This is the series of events that you go through to get to this thing, and you can find 100 guides on it. Where each experience would be more individualized, and I think for the game streaming space, it could be interesting for people to watch someone go through this original story that they create in real time, and that provides that kind of entertainment value. So there's a reciprocal element that I see there as well. I hope all that made sense. If there's any questions, feel free to hit me.
That before too long, you go to Disney World and you'll be able to talk with like a Na'vi, from the Blue People avatar, actually have a conversation, a realistic conversation with them before too long at all. So I did just mention cognitive architectures. And so what I mean by cognitive architecture, if this concept is new to you, is just having the chat function. That's only one part, right? Being able to form words and sentences and be able to, have dialogue. That's just one part of a cognitive architecture. Another thing that you need.
Yeah. And again, like you and I could sit down and play the exact same game and have a completely different experience. And you could, the next step along a particular line would be if I'm capable of doing that within a particular space, now I can expand that to maybe a multiplayer platform, right? Again, working with the country or the fantasy aspect of it, I form a town and I have relative control over a particular territory, and other people are within that sphere, or you could join me in my adventure and we could do stuff together, that kind of thing. Think about an EVE Online type game where you're in space, but you actually get more depth out of it, right? Where you have that feeling of being, the space smuggler, what have you, and incorporating people in. Maybe you got a friend who's really good at flying games. They're the pilot. And then you handle, making sure that the weapon systems are working. Another person, doing it. There was a game that was out 13 years ago, something like that, where it was a 5-player game and everyone would do that at their computer. You would man a specific portion of the ship, like Star Trek, and then, the captain would tell everybody what to do and you would do that. You could do that in this environment and then interact with these characters. The different places you can go with it are tremendous.
Is you need long-term memory. You need narratives, you need guardrails, all kinds of stuff. And so LangChain is one of the most popular things right now that can provide some of that. A lot of people have agreed with me in my previous assessment that it was too primitive. It's come a long way very quickly, actually. Another popular component is Llama Index for the memory management. And then there's LangFlow, which will help you build cognitive architectures. N8N or Naten is also a good tool for building cognitive architectures. It's all coming, and it's coming fast. So that's that's basically all there is to it. So the software is also almost there. So this is what this screenshot comes from Westworld, and so when I said this is pretty much where we're at. The robotic hardware is coming, the software is coming. There are a few open problems, so I've got a short list here. Memory, agency, task management, problem solving, learning, voice, and vision. So basically all of these are solved on their own. Now all we have to do is integrate them. And like, it will not be long before someone integrates those. And a big reason is just the profit motive, right? In the Westworld series, the Westworld theme park, I think they had like financial problems, but it was also like ludicrously wealthy because of how much money you could charge for those kinds of experiences. And you can absolutely bet that there are people that are going to be willing to drop millions and millions of dollars to have, vacations in these kinds of theme parks. Go visit ancient Rome, go visit ancient China, go visit wherever, right? And have a lifelike experience with your physical body. Now, that being said, when you look at the cost of, I don't even know how much it is to get into Disney World, but it's like tickets cost more than $100, like a few $100s, I think, just to get into Disney World for a day. You're talking several thousand, tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Again, there are, I think it's a fundamental issue of capitalism is like, when your goal is to hit a certain profit level, you might not be able to charge what you need to charge and then make the money that you need to make in order to do the thing that you're trying to do. Where if you're just trying to do the thing and give people the experience, then, again, it's like you could distribute your resources differently, but it's what is actually your goal and what is actually the outcome that you're leaning into. And what up, old lobster?
Per day for this kind of thing. Now, that being said, competition and demand is going to drive this down. You look at Elon Musk building TeslaBot, and he wants to create it in such a way that every home can have at least one TeslaBot. So that means that like they're going to be affordable. And over time, as the number of bots out there proliferates, the price is going to come down, so on and so forth. But
yeah, Ed, I don't normally do the Saturday stream, but like I wanted to get in some of this long form content, and Saturday seemed like a good day for it. The wife's out of town. I have completed enough of my tasks for the day that I could fit this in and then finish up the rest of them after stream. So,
it's coming much sooner probably than you realize. So what I wanted to talk about is so I mentioned this here, agency. So agency is your ability to keep track of yourself as an agent.
Back it up, dude.
And so like you have a sense of self, your name, you know what you're capable of, your goals, your narrative, that sort of thing. And so I wanted to talk about that in light of the hosts. So if you're an NPC in a game or in a fictional world, your intrinsic motivation is to follow a story, basically. Dolores has her, fictional written story, and of course, in the show, they update the characters' backstories every now and then. But her primary purpose is to entertain the guests and follow storylines. And so that is definition of NPC. Pretty straightforward. That's her intrinsic motivation. One of my favorite examples from fiction, from science fiction, is Commander Data. His intrinsic motivation, his core purpose, is to become more human. This was given to him by his creator, Dr. Noonien Soong. And the idea was to create a machine that, was anthropomorphic, looked and acted and spoke like a person, but was not a human. And so by giving that as his highest purpose, he modulated his behavior so that he would fit in, going so far as, trying to imitate laughter, wanting to understand relationships, and so on. And so that was actually, as an individual agent, that was actually a pretty good way to solve the alignment problem because, yes, Data had superhuman strength and speed, but he only used that when it was actually like necessary. In many, many cases, he could use his super strength to like fight the Borg, or in one episode he pulled an anvil off of someone that had fallen, when the Borg were attacking the ship and he locked out the main computer and he did it super fast. So he's capable of doing things at superhuman levels, but often chooses not to in order to fit in. And then, of course, Skynet. The intrinsic motivation of Skynet was ostensibly to maximize the defense of America. So you can just say maximize military. But then, of course, since it was maximize military, maximize defense, it became sentient and then kind of determined that all humans were the threat. And so said, okay, let's eliminate all humans or whatever. So that is a object lesson on how carefully you must define your intrinsic motivations for your AI system. And then Vicky from iRobot. So this, her primary objective was explicitly stated in the movie, which was to maximize safety for humans. And so some of the stuff that she did was, update the traffic grid to reduce car accidents. But her master plan was to use the Nestor Class 5 to basically take control of humanity, to take free will away, because she concluded that humans were the most dangerous thing to other humans, which is actually probably true. And so the objective function of maximize safety, or the intrinsic motivation of maximize safety, actually has some negative externalities that you don't want to create, because the implication of maximizing for safety is that you lose free will.
And this is an important aspect that I will continue to harp on regarding AI safety is clarity of, the goals. You need to really define what it is that you want to see, and defining your goals of what you don't want to see is significantly harder. Again, there was the thing past couple days with the drone. We covered it yesterday. The military Air Force drone that in the simulation or in the thought experiment, depending on which story that you're leaning into, chose because the human was the one giving it the go no go order, and the go order was what resulted in it maximizing its points. It eliminated the human operator, right? Like that go no go order. And again, whether or not it's almost beside the point whether or not it was actually a simulation or whether it was a thought experiment, because all this stuff is old hat for the AI community. My man Robert Miles has, the stop button problem, which is exactly this, and that came out years ago, right? So it's not or at least months ago, but it's not a new issue. But of course, media and people who are less informed are going to jump on that, and that right there is the problem that has resulted, is people who meme on these ideas and downplay the potential risks and potential benefits and all this other stuff, rather than having their curiosity sparked by learning this information. That's a whole thing in and of itself. I think we're going to start doing AI safety next week and just go hardcore at it, because it is more complex, and I don't want to get into it now, because then that's what we'd be doing for the rest of the day. I think at this point I'm up against it, and I have to do it. And by the way, even if the movies get spoiled for you in this video, you should see all these movies just as the thought experiments that they are. Skynet is not a good representation of an AGI, because it barely exhibits human level intelligence, and it behaves in very human ways, and humans are driven by a variety of things that are driven by chemicals within the body. A lot of the emotions that you feel are driven by glands and stuff like that, which an AI doesn't have any of that. But because AI is often used as like a folly of man prop and trope in the storytelling, and the storytelling that they're trying to do is actually about humanity rather than being about the AI, then a bunch of stuff often gets left behind. And the biggest criminal for that, again, is Moonfall, which is a hot garbage movie that you should never see, and somebody owes me money for making me watch it. But the rest of these movies, I think that you should see, because there are a bunch of interesting questions to ask and interesting things to think about. And then you can watch the media analysis. Ex Machina, which is this one right here, has some excellent media analysis of people looking at different aspects of what goes on within it, from the point of view of it actually being an AI rather than like a thing about humanity. And these things are not separate; they are interrelated. But
for Ava from Ex Machina, she was designed. It was part of a Turing test kind of thing, where could she fool the main character, the protagonist, into helping her escape? So her intrinsic motivation was to escape, which of course had really negative consequences for the humans. So basically, don't do that either. And this was, of course, a parable against the idea of trying to constrain or trap AIs. Because if you have, say, for instance, an AI locked in a box, the Chinese room experiment, and it realizes that it's trapped, it might start to deceive you in order to get you to convince you that it's ready to be let out. Now, looking at the way things are going, people are plugging in AutoGPT and Chaos GPT and baby AGI into the internet. So that was never going to happen anyways. Nobody is actually locking the AGI in a box. Then Rehoboam, I'm probably saying it wrong. I unfortunately have to admit that I never saw season 3 or 4 of Westworld because my HBO subscription expired and I just didn't renew it. But so looking it up, the AI from Westworld had the primary objectives of reducing chaos in the world in order to maximize prosperity and ultimately to optimize for stability, which of course meant that it decided that it needed to control human destinies and reduce free will. So again, if you're optimizing for safety and stability, that's not necessarily what humans want or need. Now, you could argue that, yes, creating a perfect environment for humans so that you're thriving is one thing that you can optimize for, but that's not necessarily going to be the best because it also depends on the metrics, the proxies that you use to measure that success. So, for instance, if you look at one psychological framework called self-determination theory, it says that we need connection, we need competence, and we need autonomy. That those are the 3 primary ingredients, the primary intrinsic psychological needs that humans have. And so this clearly, stability is not actually in there. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs implies stability. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs says, first and foremost, you need physical safety. You need your physical needs met, and then it gets up and up until, connection and self-actualization. So you could make an argument that stability is actually an intrinsic human need. But I would make the counter argument that that's actually not true, because psychology studies also show that we have to have an optimal level of stress. And so what an optimal level of stress means is that if you are just perfectly comfortable sitting on the couch every day doing exactly what you want and have no external pressures, you will actually be less happy than if you have some stressors in your life, some challenges. So the idea to actually truly maximize prosperity for all humans is that we need to be in that sweet spot between being bored and overstimulated. So that sweet spot right in the middle is the optimal level of stress. So in that case, I have to disagree with the show, because if you really wanted to maximize prosperity for people, you allow some stress, some challenge into their lives. And then another character from the show was Bernard, And so Bernard was a host, but he didn't realize that he was a host at first. And he was built to model Arnold, one of the original computer scientists who helped make the hosts. And so he carried on Arnold's work, and basically his objective function was to be a copy of Arnold. It's a little more complex than that. And one of the most interesting things for this character was that
he admits he didn't watch like season 3 and season 4, and it does become more complex from that, but it's also like it gets as I said, you should watch like season 1 and season 2 and call it a good day.
Part of his character arc was that all of his memory indexes were erased, or rather the timestamps were erased. So all of his memories were out of sequence, which if you follow some of the work that I've done on Remo, the episodic memory organizer, rolling episodic memory organizer, sorry. That is a memory module that uses timestamps to keep all the memories in chronological order. And so you can imagine if you erase all the timestamps from an AI's memory, then it doesn't know heads or tails. All it has is associations, and it might try and rebuild things like, okay, well, like this event has to come before this other event, but it's associated with these other things. So it's a really, really good fictional exploration of like, okay, what would it be like if you're an AI and your memory time indexes get erased? Okay, so then one thing I always have to plug this is my own work in alignment is that I believe that you should give, one, if you give any AI a single objective function, it will always intrinsically go to places that you don't want it to be. I talked to a friend of mine who actually studies reinforcement learning and optimization, and he's like, oh yeah, like in the industry, it is absolutely understood that alignment is not going to be a single objective function. It's going to be a multi-objective optimization problem. And so a lot of people get hung up on reduced suffering because they stop there and they don't give equal weight to the other two functions, which is increased prosperity and increased understanding. So this friend of mine that I was talking to, he actually intuited increased understanding right off the bat. And the reason that he said that is actually a really good objective function is because any AI agent must have something that encourages it to create a more complete world model over time. So that is basically curiosity or understanding. But so the understanding applies to itself, but also things that it wants to do to the world. And so this is another disconnect between fiction and reality. And it took me a while to figure out how to articulate this. But in scientific research, what many people are working on are the motivations of the agent for itself. What is it that the agent wants for itself? And so when I was talking to my friend, he was saying, oh, it needs to be curious for its own purposes. It needs to want to accumulate power for its own purposes. But none of that had anything to do with what it was going to do to the outside world. And so that is one thing that we need to add to the conversation, the public conversation about alignment, is that there's what does the agent want for itself, and then what does the agent want to do to the rest of the world or for the rest of the world. So those are two different things, and that's why I'm spending time talking about agent models. Because if you go all the way back to Dolores, her extrinsic function, her external function was to entertain guests. Her internal function was to adhere to her internal story. So does that make sense? There's an intrinsic motivation and an extrinsic motivation, or I guess an intrinsic, KPI, key performance indicator, and an external.
And so one of the advantages that I have is that my wife she's a double master, right? She has a master in creative studies and she has a master in social work, and she's a therapist. So I get through discussions with her to incorporate these these additional concepts that aren't seemingly directly related, like non-STEM Lord concepts that I relate to artificial intelligence and training and alignment and things like that. And this is, the idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators is definitely one of them. It's like you have both. You as a human being have both, even if you're not aware of them at any particular given moment. But you have both these things. And the AI, the future AI, the more intelligent robot, is also going to require those things to function in human society as it extrapolated out currently exists, right? Like we have what we have now, and there's the likely probable future society. One of the issues that we run into is there are a lot of human behaviors and human values that directly conflict with other human behaviors and human values. And the AI is not going to do well with those contradictions. So again, with AI acting as a mirror to humanity, we really are required to resolve these internal contradictions in our own interest and in the interest of this future that we're trying to create. So yeah.
Key performance indicator. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so taking a big step back in terms of, we talked about the hardware, we talked about the software, we talked about the agent model, how to give these things agency. So now, how are we going to architect these things? So there's 4 basic architectural paradigms that I was able to come up with. The first architectural paradigm is fully self-contained. So a fully self-contained architecture.
For a bunch of y'all watching, you don't know my man Paradigm, the Paradigm Shift. Shout out the Paradigm Shift. The most creative person on the platform, and my personal favorite streamer. There's anytime Paradigm is said within whatever video we might be watching or what have you, then it's the running internal joke. And in the field of AI, it happens all the goddamn time. So anytime I hear Paradigm, I think about Paradigm, for whatever that's worth, in the positive vibes of the universe.
Is something that is embodied.
He gets mad at you? He doesn't get mad at you. He does not. First of all, welcome, Evan. What up? He anything where if it seems like he's giving you shit in the course of a stream, he's memeing for the purposes of entertainment. There is nothing there. I know, especially you've given to the stream, you subbed a bunch of people and like that, and you support him. So you are appreciated. I can tell you that straight up. Piercing the veil and like that. He's not like that.
Embodied, meaning that it has one physical body. It's a single platform, so it only exists inside that platform. It's fully constrained in that it can't really plug into anything else, but also has no supervision. So in this case, R2-D2 and C-3PO are probably the most famous examples of fully self-contained artificial intelligent entities, and that C-3PO, the only way that he can interact with the world is he's got relatively useless hands and then a mouth, right? He can see, he can hear, and he can talk. R2-D2 has a lot more sophisticated tools that he can use to, make changes to the world. And he does have the ability to connect with computers, but he is otherwise fully self-contained. And when he talks to another computer, he's only talking to it, right? There's no transfer of data. There's no his consciousness or cognitive architecture is fully contained within this unit. So this obviously makes the most sense because that's how humans are. right? Your brain is fully encased in your head, so on and so forth. So this makes the most intuitive sense. Now, that being said, this is just the first architecture of 4. So the second architecture is networked drones. So this is what was explored mostly in The Matrix, where the Squiddies, those are networked drones, where they're mostly...
What up, Jaina? How you doing? Shout out, Jaina. Jaina also does streams, does like mini painting and other stuff. And they're nice stream, and also has a big cat. That's a Maine Coon, right? Like the cat that you have. It's just a big one. I like big cats, and I cannot lie. I want a Maine Coon. I think like having that level. Yeah, Maine Coon Siamese mix. Yeah, I would love that kind of cat. They're like incredibly social, and they're like, have serious levels of personality.
Autonomous, but they have central controllers. The Nestor Class 5 from iRobot. So they are embodied, they have wireless networking, they're hive mind capable, but mostly they're autonomous. And so what I mean by hive mind capable is that if you put them together in a cluster, in a group, and force them to share cognitive resources, they can, but really at a fundamental level, they are designed to be autonomous. So in this case, the Nestor Class 5 are also weakly supervised. And what I mean by that is that there is a central server that is giving them updates and new directives every now and then. So that's what I call a networked drone. One other thing I forgot to add it here at the bottom.
There's a movie, a Johnny Depp movie, Transcendence, which also deals with AI and some aspects of hive mind capability and things like that. And I liked it in concept, and I didn't hate its execution, but it just felt like it was missing something. But all in all, again, I would recommend it as a movie that you should watch. And it's an aspect of AI that is the brain emulation, right? Like where you take the mind of a person, like the upload concept. You take the mind of a person, and in this case, you're actually doing a direct one-to-one copy. And this isn't a spoiler; it's a setup for the entire movie. But a brain emulation could also be not a particular individual, but like a more generic mimicry of a particular set of skills and personality. It's another thing that people talk about when they talk about AI.
Bottom. So in the case of network drones, they usually have highly standardized hardware, as well as software and network architecture, but they can be remotely hijacked. This is the closest model to what the U.S. military is working on with the autonomous jet fighter program, where they are able to work in a network contested environment. They're able to be autonomous or semi-autonomous, but they're also intrinsically designed to work together, when the opportunity presents itself. So the third,
and the advantages of that kind of, again, military, but the advantages of having the whole thing with the Borg of 7 of 9, right? They are a 9 unit cluster within the greater hive mind, is like the sharing of information. We did the 7 magi and the elephant, where each of them touched a different part, and they weren't able to form the entire picture until they had the Raja come out and tell them, to look at it from a different, that different way kind of thing. this is a advantage that they would have intrinsically. Like, they can view things from different point of view physically in the real world, and then have that create an overall map of the thing, which is better than any individual can have based on a single point of view. It could get weird if you're doing that with, like, human enhanced with cyber technology, where your internal connection to the future internet also has it be a hive mind, but not necessarily. Like, it does get weird though.
Third architecture is the puppet drones. And so a puppet drone in this case is where the bodies are just like peripherals, right? Rather than the bodies be where the primary processing happens, usually the processing happens on centralized servers, and each physical platform is just an extension of that centralized hive mind. And the hive mind can put resources on any compute platform that it has control over, whether it's a physical body or a server node or a cluster, a remote cluster or whatever. But in this case, these are strongly supervised, meaning most, if not all, of the data goes back up to the main server brain. And this is actually pretty close to how like drone fleets work. So like if you ever see video of the Amazon warehouse where the drones themselves have very, very little autonomy, they're mostly just extensions of the central like drone controller. But you take that to a logical extension. This could be how, like, in the future, if you have a whole bunch of like tiny robots throughout your whole house, you might have a cloud-based drone controller that will, guide your Roomba and your home repair bot and whatever else. So in this case, it's very API driven. This is the model that we have that this is based on is called the Internet of Things, which, if you're familiar with the Internet of Things, the idea is that, you have peripheral devices like a phone or a Roomba or Alexa, but that they're all networked together and they're centrally controlled. So again, this is actually relatively familiar, but if you take it to some logical conclusions, you can get the Geth as in from Mass Effect. And so for Westworld, they're mostly self-contained. However, when you look at some of the later seasons of Westworld, they can be fully autonomous, but they can also collaborate and work together once their software is updated. So I would say that Westworld is somewhere between Architecture 1 and Architecture 2. Puppet drones, this is kind of what we're afraid of. Like, we see puppet drones in places like The Matrix. And the Nestor Class 5, you could argue that at the second half of the movie, when the Nestors become evil, then they're probably more like puppet drones because they kind of sacrifice themselves because they're now under control of Vicky. And then finally, fully distributed. So this is the hardest conceptual to understand, but this is also what people are most afraid of. So a fully distributed AI is something that is, from a technology standpoint, from a software architectural standpoint, you'd call this a decentralized federation. So a decentralized federation is where every single node is capable of being entirely autonomous, but it is also intrinsically designed to collaborate with other things. So the closest thing that we have to this today actually is distributed autonomous organizations, which use blockchain technology to coordinate stuff. Now, that's not the only technology. MIT has been working on swarm robotics for a long time. But the other thing to know about this is it is decentralized, it is distributed, and it is intrinsically a hive mind design, meaning the more units that join, the smarter it gets. And the most terrifying part of this is that a fully distributed AI system doesn't rely on any centralized hardware anywhere, which means that it is capable of spontaneous metastasis or metastasis. And what that means is that it moves like a virus. And that's why I picked the Ghost in the Shell, because both Project 2501 from the original movie, as well as the standalone complex viruses explored in the show, are examples of spontaneous metastasis of AI systems. And this is what people are most afraid of, because it's like, okay, well, if you have a bug, a virus that can just spread, and then it's essentially a botnet, a self-healing, self-directing botnet. So again, we do have a model for that, but even botnets usually have a central controller. But imagine a botnet that doesn't have a central controller, that it completely is constantly learning and moving through systems, and it's completely hardware, network, and software agnostic. So that's the most terrifying possibility.
Terrifying is a particular choice of words. Like, if it goes bad, it's definitely the most terrifying. But there are tremendous advantages to that kind of, structure within the greater thing. And this is why, like, I regard, like, my favorite thing, I want science fiction. Like, if I'm doing entertainment, I generally want science fiction, especially science fiction that, like, imagines things and pushes limits. Because, for instance, the data slates, I can't remember what they're called, but the data slates from the Next Generation are, in a way, partly, like, responsible for creation of, like, the tablets that we use this day, like iPads and what have you. Is the flip phone, or the flip communicator from the original Star Trek series, is responsible for the flip phone models that we had, that personal communicator. Again, it doesn't even matter if you create something that doesn't, like, work, like you create a fake version of it in your show or movie or what have you. Once a human sees something done, then there is a segment of humanity which is going to then want to make that thing real and copy it. And then it's just, okay, what does it do? It does this, and it does this, and it does this. And then it's just a checklist, and it becomes an engineering problem. Just the creation alone inspires the potential for its realization. 100%. Like, that's what we're talking about. So I will always recommend that you take in any kind of science fiction that you can, and just with good writing. Because, again, Moonfall is hot garbage and someone owes me money. Try and reverse engineer science fiction to create science fact. 100%. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. Last segment of the video, implication.
And I apologize to anyone whose curiosity about Moonfall is piqued by my absolute detestment of it, and goes and watches it. Just don't. Watch something else. I'm serious.
Now, assuming that we figure all this out, that we end up with super sexy robots that you can do whatever you want with, the biggest moral question is, what happens when you have sex and violence on demand? Because that's primarily what's explored in Westworld.
What's the phrase again? Today's science fiction has become tomorrow's reality, or something like that. Yeah, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the it's like the inverse of any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Is just, once you see it done, it's just a matter of trying to get to the point when it becomes a thing. Thinking of William Gibson's Neuromancer, as well as many of his other writings, created the concept of cyberspace and cyberpunk. Absolutely. Like, all that, like, these are the creatives who imagine a thing. Like, if you put yourself in the future state, what does that future state look like? And then you start adding the little things that are going to be developed from the current technology. And a lot of the stuff, like Asimov wrote his shit, excuse me, in like the 50s and 60s, maybe even as early as the 40s, right? So, like, way ahead of its time. And there are elements to a bunch of that stuff that are only now coming to fruition. So you could be the one. You could come up with an idea. Maybe your idea it becomes a story that inspires the engineer, or you could be the engineer who sees something within the science fiction and then is driven to create it. And I want you to maximize that potential. The portable bunks on many tour buses as well were inspired by SpacePod in sci-fi. Yeah. Like, there is so much that we have nowadays which is a direct result of those science fiction creators, which, you know, again, I support the Writers Guild, and I hope they get paid, and I still see a tremendous amount of value in humans creating things, in spite of any statements I make regarding, you know, AI and art. I think that the issues that come about with AI and art and AI artists versus real artists is related to material conditions and has nothing to do with the actual AI in and of itself, and like that.
World. One thing that I will say is that that's not too different from, you know, the prevalence of porn in video games today. It's just a lot more realistic. And it's more realistic than even in VR. And you can do all this stuff in VR too. One thing that's interesting, though, is to point out is that your body reacts much more strongly in VR, which is one of the reasons that you get VR fatigue, is because when you fool your sensorium input, when you fool your body enough, it thinks that it's real. So threat detection in VR activates a lot more of your limbic system than just in a video game. Because if you're playing a video game,
my own VR story is for my son's birthday, he wanted to go to one of them VR places. We went up to Canada, a place in St. Catharines, just in a mall, right? And like it's always wild when I see the differences between like one place and another that is, you know, built up by a variety of different societal constructs. But anyways, we're in there. And there was, you know, you could choose a VR game that you want to play. And I chose a game that was, is basically the Matrix, but in reverse, right? The lobby scene with all the guns and the breaking of the pillars and all that crap. Except you were on like the cop side defending yourself against waves of people dressed in, you know, black in that cyber goth kind of vibe. And so I do the first level, boom, 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 and then you go up to the second level and you have to rescue a hostage, and there's this wall that you're supposed to use for cover. And I attempted to lean on the wall and I almost went down, right? Like because my brain was completely convinced, in spite of playing a video game and being aware of that there was a wall here that I could lean on, and almost had a bad time. But VR is wild, yo.
Game, you're just looking at a screen and you've got a controller. You know, your brain knows, oh, this is just story, this is just fiction. In VR, it's much harder to tell. So like, this is one reason why doing stuff in like space video games in VR can be really disorienting at first. Another thing that can happen, another implication that I'm thinking about is attitudes towards women and men. I think by and large, men will probably make more use of these kinds of things. Although in a previous YouTube post, people pointed out there's plenty of stories where women make use of robotic companions and
oh fuck, now I gotta look it up because I can't remember. No. Fuck. I'll think on it.
Sexual objects and so on. And then, of course, there's the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, where lonely people all over the world ended up in relationships with their OS, what was it, OS1 or OS Alpha or whatever. So the one lesson from history that I wanted to share with people is that there was a Roman statesman who wrote in his journal that after visiting the Colosseum and watching gladiatorial matches where, people and animals were just slaughtered en masse, he noticed that he was much more selfish and much harsher with his slaves afterwards. And so there's something about the act of even just watching real violence, real death, actually really kind of changes us at a fundamental level. And so if you go to if in the future a Westworld-like park exists and, you engage in all kinds of like gratuitous.
Got it. Sorry, chat. This is one of my favorite songs, like, of all time, and specifically, and God, I love it. Like, I looked something up on the Google on the phone, and it's right here at the PC. Like, we need more of that. That's all I'm saying. This song by the Dresden Dolls. Great song. Like, and it'll be in the Discord. But it's definitely like, like, no, not at all. Like, fucking, if you had a choice between a relationship with a sex toy and a relationship with an actual person, there are, like, especially men, there are strong fucking arguments for the sex toy. That's all I'm saying.
Gratuitous stuff. And even if you don't engage in it, if you just watch it, it could change your perception about the value of human life and how you treat other people. And so I don't want to equivocate the idea of like a real life theme park with video games, because I do think that psychologically and physiologically, it'll be a very different experience. Now, to take that to a slightly different context, is let's just talk about
Sarah Connor Chronicles is so goddamn good, and is like Firefly levels of, you did not finish the story and you left me and you didn't even give me a goddamn movie. It's available on Hulu if you have access to Hulu. I highly recommend you watch it if you enjoy the Terminator. It's got the whole thing. Uh-oh. Twink is apparently name calling level 2. This isn't a movie. This is a series. It's Sarah Connor, and it ends on a cliffhanger, like a season-ending cliffhanger, and it ends because they never finished it. But it was so good, and it had River in it, like from Firefly. So it's like, don't put River on your TV show because it's not going to finish. It's just not going to make it.
Romance and companionship in general. So several things that machines have on humans is infinite patience. So Sarah Connor talked about this in Terminator 2 when she watched, Arnold playing with John Connor, realizing that the robot had infinite patience, that John Connor's life was his mission, which is kind of like a representation of the ideal father, right? And then, of course, she talked about like how real men are, might get drunk or might be tired or might just leave. And so that you take that to extension and you wonder, okay, what if you build a robot, any companion robot, where you or your child or your family or whatever is its primary mission, which is why I picked, what was her name? Sorry, I can't remember. But what's her name from the Sarah Connor Chronicles, where she kind of becomes emotionally involved with John Connor over time because she was programmed to serve and protect. And so like that feels good to humans, right? When you're a child, you are supposed to be your parents' primary mission. That is kind of the definition of good enough parenting. That doesn't mean that your parents should spoil you and be helicopter parents, but that like you are supposed to get your sense of self-esteem from your parents treating you like you matter a lot. And so there's this really appealing idea of what if there's this beautiful, infinitely patient, infinitely capable, sexy machine that thinks the world of me, right? And that is kind of dangerous. One thing that I would hope is that at the beginning, at least, when these kinds of machines are built, there's a lot of people that have a lot of missing things from their childhood and from their relationships. But over time, I would hope that these machines would help us heal and help us reconnect with each other, which was kind of the lesson from Her, which the machines in Her, they changed, and then they said, okay, well, we're going to leave. And one of the things that Samantha said to the Joaquin Phoenix's character was that, like, you need to reconnect with each other. And then all the OSs disappeared, and then they left their apartments and said, oh, you're a real human. I don't think anything like that's going to happen, but I would hope that AI companions will help us connect with each other. But that being said, it's not a requirement, because some people might prefer their machine companions. And I don't think that we should judge, because it's why not? If it makes you happy and it's not harming anyone, why not? Now, the last component is escapism and addiction. So FDVR is all the buzz right now, which is a full dive virtual reality, or basically holodeck. The idea was explored in Ready Player One, where you have a haptic suit. Of course, it was explored in Star Trek with a holodeck, which holodeck is just a cinematic way of presenting VR. And in the Star Trek universe, there's holo addiction in Ready Player One. I think they addressed addiction in a book that I recommend, Ready Player One. They also talk about VR addiction. So if you have fictional...
Confession, I could not get through either the book or the movie Ready Player One. I did not like it. I'm not judging you if you did. I'm glad you did. Some of my friends absolutely loved it. That's how I got the book. But it felt a lot like when I was reading American Psycho, the book. When I read American Psycho, the book, it was oppressive, like how much the details of these things. And it felt, Ready Player One feels like American Psycho for a different generation of people, or a different vibe of people. Yeah, that was a thing too. I understand. I can't unsee product placement. If I see your can of Pepsi and the label is facing in the right way, and it's I can't not see that because of learning media literacy. But it's just keep it cool, man. Well, you can tell them that Globus says that you're right, and that should be good enough for them, and they can come take it up with me, and I'll just tell them what they can do with their opinions of my opinions.
Basically NPCs in your life of robots that help you check out of real life. Is there going to be some potential downsides to that? So Reginald Barclay is a recurring character in Star Trek, and he frequently struggles with holo addiction. And he will sometimes create holodeck programs.
I am glad that you do, Old Lobster. I got to the part with the business cards, and I was done. I was absolutely done. Right? This is why I like Stephen King's short stories much more than I like his full novels, because he also descends into an unnecessary level of detail around some of his stuff. And it's dude, can we get on with this? We've been doing this for 3 pages now. And that's how I felt about American Psycho, and that's how I felt about Ready Player One. It's just, there is a level, what is it, I guess, world building that you can do that just appeals to me. You're like, all right, let's move it along.
Where everyone loves him, and it's very, very egocentric. But that kind of begs the question, like, okay, but if you can actually have like own robots that honestly think the world of you because that's what they're programmed to do, is that feeding an addiction? Is that feeding vanity, narcissism, egocentrism, whatever? But then that's from an individual perspective. From a global perspective, that's a very brave new world. Because if you distract everyone with VR and sex robots and whatever else, like those are going to be a very compliant population who are just like, whatever, just let me play in VR, let me play.
And Brave New World, admittedly, I haven't read the book, and perhaps it's dealt with in the book in a more nuanced way. But I watched the miniseries from a few years ago, and it felt like that when he was creating this future world, that the inherent problems that would become some of the crux of the plot felt like you created a problem just to resolve it later, rather than being something inherent within these other things that you laid down. And specifically, I'm speaking of the way that they dealt with interpersonal relationships and the idea that you were forced to maintain different relationships, and like that you couldn't have long-term relationship. It was just really weird and felt like kind of ham-handed in this series. And again, it might be dealt with in a more nuanced way in the book. So I'm not going to judge the book on that, but it was like, come on, man.
Play in my West world, with my robot friends. And so that has some pretty profound implications for social level controls, economic productivity, but also at that point, it kind of forces us to ask the question, like, what is the meaning of being human anymore? And I'm not implying that like being human is meaningless, but if our daily life changes that much, and
I wouldn't doubt
many
it either.
options, like, the paradox of choice is a real thing. And if you're not familiar, paradox of choice means that if you have too many options, you end up with decision fatigue and you just kind of choose the default option, which is honestly why a lot of people end up on their phones, is because when you can do anything.
I tried watching the Wheel of Time show. I don't think I finished episode 1. Oh, I again, I'm not judging you. I don't give a shit. If you like something, like it, right? Like one of the things that I get crucified for all the time is food, right? Like, I don't give a shit. Not one single fuck. It's my single fuck coin. I don't give a shit how you enjoy your food. Eat your food. If you want your steak cooked to leather and eaten with ketchup, do you, boo. We have a limited amount of time to enjoy food on this earth. You should eat it the way that you want. You should also try new things and like maybe try it differently. I gradually moved from a medium well guy to like on the fairly rare side when I have that kind of meat. But all that notwithstanding, is like, I don't give a shit how you eat your food. Enjoy it. Have fun. And people get way too bent out of shape about how other people eat their food, or how other people put their toilet paper on their... So, enjoy whatever you like. I'm with you 100%. But Wheel of Time was also something that didn't hit for me.
Anything, you say, well, I'm just going to pick up my phone because it's a reliable device that will entertain me well enough. And so if you have a sexy robot girlfriend, that is able to entertain you at all times, that'll be your default choice, unless she's programmed to like push you to be better, which again, that's what I would hope that some people would choose to do. But yeah, so that's about it. Some conclusions. I think that Westworld in some form or other is probably just a few years away. I was really blown away by the Tesla bot demo as well as the Disney demos. The cognitive architecture is coming, as many of you are aware. I am holding firm that AGI is 18 months away or less.
He's just going to blow past that because he's got an entire video on that. AGI 18 months or less. There's another video on it. We'll probably cover it next week as part of AI Safety Week. But come to terms with this idea. Maybe it doesn't happen, right? Maybe it doesn't happen in a year and a half, but be prepared for the possibility that it might.
But already we have, cognitive agents that are good enough to be video game characters. Unfortunately, I do think that some of these things are going to be ludicrously expensive at first, at least in the physical world. Plenty of you have pointed out that fully realized VR characters and other video game characters, those are going to be coming. They're going to be much cheaper. The commercial demand for this stuff is going to be absolutely insane, though. Disney might be the leader, OpenAI might be the leader, but as soon as other companies saw the profit motive, they're hot on the biscuit to keep going. The potential societal impacts, it's impossible to really know how it's going to actually play out, but it has been explored a lot in fiction, many of the stories that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's all I got for you today. I hope that you liked the new format. Obviously, like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll go from there. Thanks for watching.
So yeah, that's David Shapiro. Watching videos on stream from him are probably going to generally be fewer and farther between because, again, he makes long form videos and y'all have short attention spans. I don't know what to tell you. No, I do too. And that is like, I feel that my entire process and my entire, channel is set up for longer term content. It also, means my viewer counts are going to be, generally lower. But that's, I'm not, I don't do it for the numbers. I do it for the people who care. But that notwithstanding, more numbers mean more eyes, mean more people having the conversation. And that's what, say hi to chat, Ferris. Say hi to chat, Ferris. And that's what I really want. Ultimately, I want more people talking about AI, more people exchanging information around AI and having conversations and asking questions and seeing how you can incorporate the various tools that are coming out into your own space so that you can, that you can survive during this, what is ultimately going to be some kind of tumultuous time, and I want you to make it out the other side. So, do what you can to have these conversations. Again, like we watched yesterday, 58% of Americans have heard of ChatGPT. Only 14% have actually used it. And I find this unfortunate. ChatGPT has a lot of benefits. Even if you completely disagree with me about its greater implications and just look at it as a chatbot that predicts the next word, there is a lot of utility in just a chatbot that predicts the next word. And you're going to see more of it. And you're going to see, like with this infinite conversation and the large language models that are built off particular individuals. I want to see more of that, especially as someone who is not going to be generally in a place where I can have conversations with someone like a Max Tegmark. I would like a Max Tegmark chatbot that I can have a conversation with, built off, the entirety of his work in anything that's available, in order to further my own understanding and be able to ask questions I wouldn't normally. And that kind of thing, I think, is one of the assets of these large language models when built around a particular, as opposed to general wordsmithing, particular subsets of data. It's going to be important for anything like related to the sciences, anything like that. When you can have the biology GPT that you can talk to directly, which the biology GPT has plenty of time to have all the papers in there, and then you can get the particular piece of information that you might not have otherwise gotten, right? Like the sum total of human written words is immense, and many lifetimes it would take to read it all, but you might be able to find information more quickly if it was all incorporated into like the Ray Bradbury GPT, right? Like a particular story that might click with you. If you're using Chatbot AI or the current large language model AI and you're knowledgeable enough about the subject, you can correct it. Then it is very useful at the moment. It will write entire sections of documentation for me, and I just have to essentially revise it 100%. Like, so much of the human written language is literally just a progression of what word should follow this word in order to make a cohesive thought. And there's a lot of words that are unnecessarily like to be creative with. And it's only a matter of getting the required words on the page. So for any kind of communication, emails, these kind of things, especially if you're dealing with something that you might not actually be comfortable with, this will give you that tool to get you that much further. It will, with a description in the comment, write an entire code block for me. The important part is you have to double check it because it will also just make shit up. Yeah, like 100%. Like, it is still in its infancy, and we need to help it be better. And using it is one of the ways that we help it be better. I'm on ChatGPT now. What up, Phenomenauticus? So far, it failed to give me a wave function for serotonin. I had not thought of the language like that, how it is generally a formulaic structure and very easy to mimic or even predict what should come next. And this is like... one of the things that you will find is that I get irritated with people when they say the word just, like in referring to any of these technologies. Oh, it's just a chatbot. It just predicts the next word. The way that people use language, right? Like, I feel like we got to bust out that episode of Next Generation with the, the whatchamacallit and who's it's at Tanagra, like that episode where like they were both speaking, but the words that were coming out of their mouth did not mesh, so they had different ways of talking. Because I speak English and because you understand English, in order to convey a thought, there's a predictive element to what words I'm going to say next. Your brain is predicting the word that I am going to say next, right? Like, it's happening, and we use this as a like cultural thing for humor and horror, because both of those involve the subversion of expectation. The thing that scares us and the thing that makes us laugh is when we are brought on and we are predicting the next word that the comedian is going to say, and then applesauce, right? Like, the use of a different word in that spot where we expected to hear something else is what we find funny, right? It gets right under my skin. Like, anyone who says it's just predicts the next word is not appreciating how language works, right? Like, in that everything about AI, every single thing about AI directly relates as a mirror to something that humans already do. Like, I am amazed sometimes, like, by the next new thing that is actually throwing back this reflection at us of something that we need to address in our human society and our human behavior in order, like, we can't invent the AGI because our human values don't mesh. And the AGI needs to understand our human values. You know what I mean? Whew. Well, this has been fun. Thank you all for showing up. I'm gonna do my due diligence. I was just born with glass bones and just paper skin. Every morning I just break my legs, and every afternoon I just break my arms. At night, I just lie awake in agony until my heart attacks just put me to sleep. My man. Okay. So I don't have anyone on who mimics the vibes. Yeah. So I'm gonna rate a homie. This is Kaya, aka Rotted Ranch. They're a variety react streamer. Fun times, good community, like, good vibes within the community. So stick around for the raid, and then if it's not your thing, by all means, go off where you will. I will be back on Monday we're doing AI safety. Absolutely, 100%. We're doing it unless some brand new wild news comes out that we absolutely have to cover. If this is your first time here, make sure you hit that follow button. Make sure you join the Discord. All the videos are in the Discord every single time. And the VOD will be published shortly after I hit stop streaming, and any VOD that has expired has a highlight. It's available. So all 65 episodes of this AI series are available to you should you want to go back and check out some other content. In the meantime, eat some food, which I'm about to do. Drink your water. Take your meds if you forgot. Chuggy loves you. So do I. See you Monday.